Welcome to Grove Bites. I'm Richard Steele. My guests today are Greg Forster and James Haslam, two of the authors of the Grove book, COVID-19, Where is God in All This? This book weaves together the experiences of three senior medical professionals, Chris Grimes, John Pilling and James, all consultants in their own fields, along with reflections by two Anglican clergy, Greg Forster, who has long experience of parish ministry, and Michael Langrish, former Bishop of Exeter. I began by asking Greg why his opening chapter was entitled COVID-19, a Moral Challenge. It was, he said, because of the amount of guilt that people felt.
You bring the virus home, your wife, your husband, your granny catches it. She's the one who dies.
Right.
And you feel guilty that you've done that. I mean, that's a rather dramatic portrait of what might happen. But I think every so often now you still see it as people are interviewed following someone's death, a tragedy, on the TV. That kind of feeling, if only we'd done it differently, if only we'd realized how deadly it was, we'd have handled things differently. And I was aware of that sort of problem and felt people needed to be almost to get it in perspective, not as I'm guilty because I brought it home, but rather I did the best I could. I feel guilty about it, but that's not a real moral guilt. The moral guilt comes if I know I'm infectious and I still go to the pub or whatever.
Thank you. James, can I bring you in at this point? Because in your chapter, you describe COVID as the greatest global healthcare crisis in living memory, which I think a lot of people would agree with. You're not uncritical of either healthcare or political leaders, are you? But you hope maybe we'll do better in the future. Can you tell me a little bit more about where you were approaching it from?
So my professional sort of avenue is that I'm a consultant in anesthesia and intensive care medicine. So I've been on one of the front lines of the pandemic, looking after critically ill patients, many COVID patients over this last year. So we wrote these chapters in the summer of 2020, and we're now recording this in early spring 2021, towards the tail end of our second wave over the winter of 2020 into 21. And yeah, in terms of the sort of national leadership, I think it's been an unprecedented challenge, and I don't envy the politicians having to make the incredibly difficult decisions that they've had to. And I think anybody in that position would have found that extremely challenging. And there's lots of trade-offs that they've had to do, which I sort of tried to address some of those in my section of the booklet. But I think what I wanted to do is to be sort of reflective about what had gone and potentially some of the mistakes that had happened so far, and also anticipating at that stage we were anticipating this second wave and what lessons might be learned and implemented for a second wave or any future pandemic. And I think there is a lot we can learn. And hopefully we can help try and mitigate some of the harms for future.
So how do you think we did cope with the second wave better than the first wave from your perspective? Because you're, as you say, very much on the front line.
Yeah, I think sort of clinically as physicians and healthcare teams on the front line, I think we had learned some lessons for sure. I think we'd been there, done that, and in fact, in some ways, we'd learned how the disease behaves and how best to treat it. And I think our outcomes were significantly better second time round over this winter. Although the scale of the challenge this time around was significantly worse than the spring of 2020. So yeah, our experience in where I work in Salisbury in South Wiltshire was that it was a bigger challenge, but and we were also facing it with drained batteries in a sense that this had been going on for a long time. People were really weary and exhausted already. But I do feel in reflection that we we've done a really great job, all things considered. There's been some tragedies and we've seen many deaths, but we've also seen many success stories of many lives saved. And so I guess that's some of the kind of clinical medical aspects of it. But I guess, you know, we've all had to face the challenges of what it's like to be so isolated. I mean, I've been able to go to work for a significant proportion of my week, which has been a blessing in some ways, although it's been a real challenge as well. But for many people, it's been such an isolating time. And even though I've been at work and had get to come home to my family, you just feel that sense of isolation. You know, we haven't met as a church for approaching a year now. We don't have our own building. We hire a school, and we haven't been able to use that facility. So we've been meeting online for a year, and that's just, it's not right. And there's that constant sense that this isn't how life should be lived. And I think that's been one of the challenges, hasn't it?
Greg, can I bring you in, because this book isn't uncritical of the church either. Have you any reflections of what more the church might be doing? You know, how the church might be getting a bit more involved and making a positive contribution to the future?
We didn't set out to lay blame. I mean, I would be quite critical of some of the church reaction. There was a tendency, certainly in the Church of England, to say, look what a good job we're doing in delivering food parcels, and saying very, very little by comparison about the Christian hope that we have in the face of death and in the face of grief and the guilt feelings I was talking about earlier. Vincent Nichols got that right in, I think, almost the first week of the pandemic, when he was interviewed, and he started talking about Christian hope in the face of death and the way to handle that. We're getting, I mean, there was a lack of prayer, or publicly announced prayer, if you like. The churches were closed and clergy weren't allowed in, which to me was a travesty of what should have been.
That's quite a controversial topic, that, isn't it, Greg?
Yes.
Over these few months. Yeah. Very strong.
And I mean, clergy going into church to pray morning prayer is what we promised to do when we were ordained. Whether we all do it quite as religiously as we should is another matter, but that wouldn't have infected anyone. And yet it was a cop-out, I think. I'm sorry if that's a bit strong language.
I'm sure some people might use stronger, Greg, but still.
What we have now got is the archbishops calling for prayer regularly. That is a better reaction.
James, can I come back to you, because you use Nehemiah as the biblical focus for your final chapter. Why did you use Nehemiah?
Well, I'd heard a sermon from one of our leaders of our network of churches called Guy Miller. He preached on Nehemiah and made some of the analogies between that situation and our current one in the pandemic. And it really resonated with me. And that sort of seed grew into what became my...
So what was it particular about Nehemiah's situation and the situation in Jerusalem he was facing?
I think that sense of devastation and of the society and the city and the nation, and the spiritually, everything was in ruin, and the sense of calling to rebuild. And I wanted my section to have a ring of hope to it, and looking to the future about how as a church we can be called to help rebuild society after what will be a huge aftermath. You know, even this week we've heard about the tax rises that are going to be needed to help sort of repay the enormous debt that we've accrued during this time. But there's going to be a whole realm of other aspects of aftermath of this, and you just think about the mental health toll of people across society who've been so isolated and struggling with the fear. And you think about the people who've lost loved ones and grieving, and people whose finances are in dire straits after this, and businesses collapsing, and you just think the church needs to be able to reach out and help address some of these issues, and to help rebuild what will be a huge rebuilding project. And so that's what I felt. It had some real analogies and resonances with our current situation.
To get a copy of this book, go to the Grove Books website, where you can order COVID-19, Where is God in All This, as a print copy with free postage, or as a PDF. There are many more great Grove books applying the Bible to a wide variety of situations. They're written by authors who know what they're writing about. Grove Books are bite-sized publications you can really get your teeth into. Goodbye for now. Hope to see you again soon.